The space station called Nexus 7 floated at the edge of Dragon territory, a massive ring of metal and glass that served as a meeting point for dozens of species from across the galaxy. Ships came and went at all hours, bringing traders and travelers and soldiers looking for a place to rest between missions. At the heart of the station, built into the oldest section, where the original founders had first set up their trading posts, there was a tavern called the Ember's Rest. It was not the biggest tavern on the station. It was not the cleanest or the most modern, but it had a reputation that spread across 3 star systems because the Ember's Rest was one of the few places where dragons and humans could drink side by side without bloodshed. The owner, an old gray dragon named, had established strict rules. No weapons inside. No fighting. No talk of the old wars unless everyone at the table agreed to it. Anyone who broke these rules was thrown out through the airlock, regardless of species or status. Molly had worked at the Ember's Rest for 6 months. She was 24 years old, with brown hair that she kept tied back in a practical ponytail and green eyes that her father always said reminded him of spring grass back on Earth. She was not tall by human standards, barely 5'5", and she was not particularly strong or fast or special in any way that she could see. She was just a human woman trying to survive in a galaxy that had nearly wiped out her kind 3 decades ago. The contact wars had ended before Molly was born, but she had grown up with the stories. Every human child learned about the day the dragons came, when their great ships blocked out the sun over every major city on Earth. They learned about the burning of New York and Tokyo and London, about the refugee camps and the desperate last stands and the billions who died in the first year alone. They learned about the moment when humanity had stared into the face of extinction and somehow, against all odds, survived. The Accords had brought peace. 30 years of uneasy cooperation between species that had tried their best to destroy each other. Trade routes opened. Diplomatic channels formed. Slowly, carefully, humans began to venture out into dragon space, and dragons began to visit human worlds. Most of the time, nothing bad happened. Most of the time, the old hatred stayed buried under layers of politics and commerce and the simple need to keep living. But Molly had learned quickly that the hatred was still there, just below the surface. She heard it in the way some dragons spoke to her, their voices dripping with contempt. She saw it in the way certain human traders refused to sit at tables where dragons had eaten. She felt it in her own chest sometimes, late at night, when she thought about her grandmother who had died in the burning of New Denver. Tonight, the Ember's Rest was crowded. A merchant convoy had arrived that morning, bringing supplies from the inner systems, and the crews had been drinking steadily since noon. Molly moved between tables with practiced ease, carrying trays loaded with drinks and food, smiling at customers even when they did not smile back. She had gotten good at this job. She had learned how to read the mood of a room, how to spot trouble before it started, how to make herself useful without drawing too much attention. She was clearing empty glasses from a table near the back when the main door opened, and a group of dragons walked in. There were 5 of them, all males, all wearing the ceremonial bands and scars that marked them as veterans of the contact wars. They moved through the crowded room like predators passing through a field of prey, their golden and amber eyes scanning every face, their clawed feet clicking against the stone floor. Other patrons stepped aside to let them pass, even other dragons. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were members of the Scorched Wing Legion, the most feared fighting force in dragon history. Molly felt her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to keep working. She had served veterans before. She had served dragons who openly bragged about killing humans. As long as she did her job and kept her head down, she would be fine. That was what she told herself. That was what she had to believe. The veterans claimed a large booth in the corner, the same booth they always took when they visited the station. Molly had learned from other servers that the Scorched Wing Legion gathered here once every few months, to drink and remember their fallen comrades and tell stories of battles that had shaped the galaxy. They were loud and demanding and sometimes cruel, but they tipped well and they followed rules. As long as you did not give them a reason to notice you, they would leave you alone. Himself came out from behind the bar to greet them. He exchanged formal words with the largest of the veterans, a massive dragon with scales the color of dried blood. Molly watched from the corner of her eye as the two old warriors clasped forearms in the traditional greeting of equals, then turned and caught her attention with a small gesture. She approached the bar, trying to look calm. "Molly," said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I need you to serve the Scorched Wing tonight, called in sick and is handling the merchant cruise." "Me?" She could not keep the surprise out of her voice. "Are you sure that is a good idea?" "You are my best server. You do not panic, you do not make mistakes, and you know how to keep your mouth shut." He handed her a tray with 5 goblets of flame mead, a drink that was literally on fire and had to be handled with special heat-resistant gloves. "Just be polite, be efficient. Do not stare at their scars or their honors, and whatever you do, do not mention the wars unless they bring it up first." Molly took the tray. The heat from the burning drink seeped through her gloves, warm but not painful. She had served flame mead many times before. She knew how to carry it, how to set it down without spilling, how to step back quickly in case a dragon decided to breathe fire into his cup to make it burn hotter. "I can do this," she said, more to herself than to. "I know you can." The old dragon's eyes softened slightly. "That is why I hired you." She crossed the room toward the corner booth, weaving between tables with the ease of long practice. As she got closer, she could hear the veterans talking among themselves, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder. "The younglings these days know nothing of real battle," one of them was saying. He had scales of burnished copper and a long scar running down the left side of his face. "They train in simulators and think they understand war." "They will learn soon enough," another replied. This one was smaller than the others, his scales a mottled gray and green. "The outer rim colonies are getting restless. Mark my words, there will be fighting before the decade is out." "Let them come." The largest dragon, the one with the blood-red scales, spoke with absolute confidence. "We broke the humans when they were at the height of their power. We can break anyone." Molly reached the table and set down the first goblet in front of the gray-green dragon. He barely glanced at her, too absorbed in the conversation to notice a mere human server. She moved around the table, placing each drink carefully, keeping her movements smooth and professional. She was setting down the last goblet in front of the blood-red dragon when she felt his eye on her. Not eyes. Eye. The left side of his face was a ruin of scar tissue, the eye socket empty and covered with a patch of darker scales that had grown over the wound. His remaining eye, golden and sharp as a blade, fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Human," he said. Molly straightened up and met his gaze. She had learned not to look away when dragons addressed her directly. They saw it as weakness, and weakness invited contempt. "Yes, honored guest. You serve our drinks with steady hands." It was not a question. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "Most of your kind tremble when they come near us. I have worked here for 6 months. I have learned that trembling makes it harder to carry trays." Something flickered in his golden eye. It might have been amusement, it might have been irritation. With dragons, it was often hard to tell. "What is your name, human?" "Molly." He repeated the name slowly as if tasting it. "I knew a human with that name once, long ago." Molly's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her face neutral. Was not a rare name among humans. There was no reason to think he was talking about anyone she knew. "Is there anything else you need, honored guest?" "Not yet." He waved a clawed hand in dismissal. "Go about your duties. I will call for you when we require more drinks." She dipped her head in the shallow bow of respect and turned away from the table. As she walked back toward the bar, she could feel his eye still on her, watching her move through the crowd. She did not look back. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of orders and deliveries and empty glasses. The merchant cruise grew louder and more rowdy as the night went on, and Molly had to break up two arguments before they turned into fights. The Scorched Wing veterans remained in their corner booth, drinking steadily but never losing control. Every time she brought them fresh drinks, the blood-red dragon watched her with that single golden eye, but he did not speak to her again. It was nearly midnight by station time when she approached their table with another round of flame mead. The veterans had grown quieter over the past hour, their earlier boasting giving way to a more reflective mood. One of them, the copper-scaled dragon with the facial scar, was telling a story about a battle that had taken place during the final months of the Contact Wars. "We had them trapped in the valley," he was saying. 10,000 humans, mostly civilians with nowhere to run. Our orders were to burn them all, leave nothing alive. Molly set down the drinks, trying not to listen. She did not want to hear this. She did not want to picture the scene he was describing. But then received new orders from the high command. The copper dragon gestured toward the blood-red veteran. "Tell them what you did, old friend." The dragon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "I let them go." The youngest dragon at the table, one Molly had not heard speak before, made a sound of disbelief. His scales were bright blue, almost iridescent, and he had the eager look of someone who had never seen real combat. "You let them go, 10,000 humans." The war was ending, everyone knew it. The accords were being negotiated even as we fought. What purpose would their deaths have served? They were farmers and shopkeepers and children. They were not warriors. They were the enemy. They were living beings. His voice hardened. "I have killed more humans than I can count, young one. I have burned cities and slaughtered armies and done things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. But I have never killed without reason. I have never murdered the helpless simply because I could." The young dragon fell silent, chastened by the rebuke. Molly finished setting down the drinks and was about to step away when spoke again. "Wait." She stopped and turned back to face him. "Yes, honored guest. Sit with us." The other dragons looked at their leader in surprise. The copper-scaled one actually laughed. "Have you lost your mind? She is a human server. She does not belong at our table." "She belongs wherever I say she belongs." The old warrior's voice left no room for argument. "Bring a chair, Molly. I wish to speak with you." Molly hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to make an excuse and get away from this table as quickly as possible. But there was something in his eye that stopped her. Not threat, not malice, something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. She grabbed an empty chair from a nearby table and pulled it up to the edge of the booth. The other dragons shifted to make room, their expressions ranging from confused to annoyed. The young blue dragon looked at her like she was an insect that had landed on his food. "I apologize if I have done something to offend," Molly said carefully. "If there was a problem with the service, I will make it right." "There is no problem." Picked up his goblet and took a long drink, the flames flickering against his face. "I wish to ask you some questions, and I would prefer to ask them at eye level rather than craning my neck to look up at you." "Of course." She sat down, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. "What would you like to know?" "Your family name. It is not common among humans, but it is not rare either. Where does your family come from?" "Earth, the western region of the northern continent, a place called Oregon." "Oregon," he said the word slowly. "I do not know this place, but I knew a human from the western region once. Her name was—" Molly's blood went cold. "That is my mother's name." Silence fell over the table. The other dragons exchanged uncertain looks. The young blue one leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Your mother," set down his goblet with exaggerated care. "Tell me about her. What does she look like? How old is she now?" "She is 51 years old. Gray hair, though it used to be brown like mine. She is short, even for a human. She has a scar on her left shoulder that she never explains." A scar. The old dragon's voice dropped to a whisper. What kind of scar? A burn scar, in the shape of a symbol. She always covers it with her clothing, but I saw it once when I was a child. I asked her what it was, and she told me it was a reminder of a choice she made during the wars. Closed his eye. For a long moment he did not move or speak. Then, slowly, he began to unwrap the leather bracer that covered his left forearm. Molly watched as he revealed the scales beneath. They were darker than the rest of his arm, damaged by old burns that had never fully healed. And there, seared into the flesh, was a symbol she recognized instantly. It was the same symbol her mother carried. "My mom has your mark," Molly said. The words came out before she could stop them, before she could think about what they meant or what reaction they might cause. She simply saw the symbol and spoke the truth, because the truth was all she had. Opened his eye and looked at her. There were tears there, she realized with shock. Dragons could cry. She had not known that. "I gave her that mark," he said, 34 years ago, in the ruins of a human city whose name I have long forgotten. She was 17 years old, barely more than a hatchling by your people's standards, and she walked into my camp alone and unarmed to deliver a warning that saved 300 dragon children from death. The other veterans had gone completely still. Even the young blue dragon was staring with wide eyes, his earlier contempt replaced by something like awe. "I do not understand," Molly said. "My mother never told me any of this. She never said she helped dragons during the war. She would not have. The humans who collaborated with us, even those who did so for righteous reasons, were considered traitors by their own kind. If your people had learned what she did, they would have killed her. The mark I gave her was meant to protect her in dragon territory, but it was also a death sentence if the wrong humans ever saw it." Molly's mind was racing. She thought of all the times her mother had refused to talk about the wars, all the nightmares she had witnessed, the screaming in the middle of the night that her mother always blamed on bad dreams about nothing, all the scars, visible and invisible, that her mother carried. "What did she do?" Molly asked. "What warning did she deliver?" Took a deep breath. Around him, the other dragons leaned in, equally eager to hear the story. It was the final weeks of the war. The accords were being negotiated, but neither side trusted the other. Extremists on both sides were trying to sabotage the peace process, hoping to push their people toward total war and total victory. The dragon extremists wanted to exterminate humanity entirely. The human extremists wanted to destroy our ability to reproduce. He paused, his claws tightening around his goblet. "We had a nesting ground on Earth's moon. 300 eggs, the next generation of the Scorched Wing Legion, guarded by a small force of warriors. The human extremists had obtained nuclear weapons from somewhere. They planned to destroy the nesting ground before the accords could be signed, ensuring that there would be no peace. And my mother found out about this plan. She was working as a translator for the human resistance, a low-level position barely noticed by the commanders, but she had sharp ears and a sharper mind, and she heard things that she was not supposed to hear. When she learned what the extremists were planning, she made a choice. She stole a communicator, walked out of her camp in the middle of the night, and made her way to the nearest dragon outpost." "That is insane," the copper-scaled dragon said. "She could have been killed a dozen times before she even reached your lines." "She was shot twice along the way, once in the leg, once in the shoulder. She kept walking. When she reached our perimeter, my warriors wanted to burn her on the spot. I stopped them. There was something in her eyes, something desperate and determined and utterly without fear. I wanted to know what could drive a human to walk through fire to reach her enemies." Molly felt tears building in her own eyes. She blinked them back, but a few escaped anyway. "What did she say to you?" "She said, 'I know what my people have done to yours. I know what your people have done to mine. But there are children on both sides who have done nothing wrong. Let me help you save yours, and maybe someday you can help save mine. The words hung in the air like a prayer. I believed her, continued. I do not know why. By all logic, it should have been a trap, a clever trick to lure our forces away from their positions. But I looked into her eyes and I saw truth there, so I gave the order to evacuate the nesting ground. And the bombs? They fell 6 hours after we cleared out the last egg. The entire facility was destroyed. If your mother had not warned us, 300 of our children would have died in nuclear fire. My gods, the young blue dragon whispered. He was staring at Molly now with something that might have been respect. I branded her myself, said. The mark of the Ash Covenant. It was an ancient symbol from the days before our people traveled between stars. It meant that she was under my personal protection and under the protection of any dragon who recognized the mark. Anyone who harmed her would answer to me. But she went back to the humans, Molly said. She did not stay in dragon territory. She had family, a younger brother, a sick father who needed care. She could not abandon them, even though staying with the humans put her at risk. So I gave her the mark and sent her back to her people with my blessing. I told her that if she ever needed help, she should find a dragon and show them the symbol, and they would know what it meant. Did you ever see her again? No, the old warrior's voice was heavy with regret. After the accords were signed, I tried to find her. I searched for years, but is not a unique name among humans, and she had clearly changed her location and her identity to escape the extremists who wanted her dead. Eventually, I had to accept that I might never know what happened to her. He reached across the table and placed his massive clawed hand over Molly's small human one. The gesture was gentle, almost tender. And now her daughter appears in a tavern at the edge of dragon space, carrying the same green eyes and the same fearless spirit. The universe has a strange sense of humor. Molly did not know what to say. Her entire understanding of her mother, of her family, of the history she had been taught as a child, was shifting beneath her feet like sand in a storm. Why did she never tell us? She finally managed. Why did she hide this for so long? Shame, perhaps, or fear, or simply the desire to protect you from a truth that could put you in danger, squeezed her hand gently. Your mother made an impossible choice during an impossible time. She betrayed her own species to save the children of her enemies. That is not an easy thing to live with, no matter how right the choice may have been. She saved your children. She was a hero. She was human. The old dragon's voice was soft. That is what humans do. They sacrifice themselves for others. They love their enemies. They hope for peace even in the middle of war. I have lived for 200 years and I have never met a species quite like yours. You are fragile and short-lived and easily broken, but there is something in you that refuses to give up. Something that even fire cannot destroy. He looked around the table at his fellow veterans. This is what we fought against, brothers. This is what we tried to exterminate. A species that could produce a 17-year-old girl who would walk through bullets to save the children of her enemy. We should be grateful that we failed. The copper-scaled dragon nodded slowly. I never thought I would say this about a human, but I believe you are right, old friend. There is something remarkable about them. I am not remarkable, Molly said. I am just a waitress. You are the daughter of, replied. That makes you far more than just a waitress. Under the old laws, you are protected by blood debt. Any dragon who harms you will face the wrath of the Scorched Wing Legion and every warrior who owes a debt to your mother's courage. The young blue dragon suddenly stood and bowed his head toward Molly. I apologize, he said. When you first approached our table, I thought you were beneath my notice. I was wrong. I am honored to meet the daughter of such a brave woman. One by one, the other dragons rose and bowed as well. Molly sat in stunned silence as some of the most feared warriors in the galaxy paid her respect. I do not deserve this, she said. You do not need to deserve it, rose last, his massive form towering over the table. It is given freely, in honor of the debt we owe your family. From this day forward, you are a friend to the Scorched Wing Legion. If you ever need help, you have only to ask. I do not need anything. I just want to live my life and do my job. Then live your life and do your job. But know that you do not do it alone. Know that there are dragons who will fight for you, who will die for you, because of what your mother did 34 years ago. He reached into a pouch at his belt and a small object. It was a medallion, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. Carved into its surface was the same symbol that marked his arm and his mother's shoulder. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her palm. "If you ever need to prove your connection to the Ash Covenant, show them this. They will know what it means." Molly looked down at the medallion. It was warm against her skin, as if it held some inner fire. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank your mother," sat back down and picked up his goblet. "Now go, call her. Tell her that the Unbroken remembers his debt. Tell her that her courage is not forgotten and that her daughter walks under the protection of dragons." Molly stood on shaky legs. She tucked the medallion into her pocket and looked around the table one last time. 5 dragon veterans looked back at her, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to moved. The young blue one even managed a small smile. "I will tell her," Molly said. "I will tell her everything." She turned and walked away from the table, her mind swirling with questions and emotions she could not begin to sort out. She passed at the bar, and the old gray dragon gave her a knowing look but said nothing. She pushed through the door of the tavern and stepped out into the corridor beyond, where the artificial lights of the station mimicked the glow of a setting sun. She found a quiet alcove near one of the observation windows and pulled out her communicator. Through the glass, she could see the stars stretching out in every direction, countless points of light representing worlds and species and histories she was only beginning to understand. She typed a message to her mother. Her fingers trembled as she wrote. "Mom, I met someone tonight, a dragon named. He told me what you did during the wars. He showed me the mark. I understand now why you never talked about it. I understand why you always told us not to hate, why you said that every species has the capacity for good and evil. You were not just speaking from philosophy. You were speaking from experience. I am so proud of you, Mom. I am so proud to be your daughter. The dragons remember what you did. They remember and they are grateful. Said to tell you that your courage is not forgotten. He said to tell you that I walk under the protection of the Scorched Wing Legion now because of you, because of what you did 34 years ago. I love you, Mom. I love you so much. Call me when you get this. I want to hear your voice." She sent the message and watched it disappear into the communications network, traveling at the speed of light toward the small blue planet where her mother lived. Then she leaned against the window and cried. She cried for her mother, who had carried this secret for so long. She cried for the 300 dragon children who had been saved by the courage of a teenage girl. She cried for the billions who had died in the contact wars, human and dragon alike, victims of a conflict that could have been avoided if only both sides had been willing to see each other as something other than monsters. And she cried for herself, because her entire life had just changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. After a while, the tears stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. The stars were still there, unchanging and indifferent. The station hummed around her, full of life and commerce and the endless, complicated business of existence. She had work to do, tables to clear, drinks to serve, a job that might seem small and unimportant in the grand scheme of things, but that kept her alive and gave her purpose. She was about to turn back toward the tavern when her communicator buzzed, a response faster than she had expected. She looked down at the screen and saw her mother's name. The message was short, just 3 words. "He remembers me." Molly smiled through fresh tears and typed her reply. "He never forgot. He has been looking for you for 30 years. He said you changed his understanding of what humans could be. He said you made him argue for peace instead of genocide. He said you were the bravest person he ever met. The response came a moment later. I was terrified. Every step of the way I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I thought they would burn me before I could speak a single word. But you kept walking. I kept walking, because there were children who needed saving, because it was the right thing to do, because I could not live with myself if I stood by and did nothing. That is what he said. He said that is what makes humans special, that we sacrifice ourselves for others, that we love our enemies, that we hope for peace even in the middle of war. There was a long pause before the next message arrived. I never told you because I was afraid. Afraid of what the extremists might do if they found out. Afraid of what you might think of me. Afraid that you would see me as a traitor instead of understanding why I did what I did. I understand, Mom. I understand completely. You saved 300 children. You helped end a war. You are a hero, even if you never wanted to be one. I am just a baker now. I make bread and cookies and birthday cakes. I have a small life in a small town on a planet that is still healing from the wounds of the past. And your daughter works in a tavern at the edge of dragon space, serving drinks to the warriors you saved. The universe has a strange sense of humor. It does indeed. Another pause, then. Molly, I love you. I am so proud of the woman you have become. When you come home, we will talk about all of this. I will tell you everything. No more secrets. No more secrets. I love you too, Mom. Molly put the communicator back in her pocket and looked out at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, a gray-haired woman was probably crying as hard as she was. But they were good tears, healing tears, the tears of two people who had finally found their way to the truth. She turned and walked back toward the Ember's Rest. The doors slid open as she approached, releasing a wave of noise and warmth and light. Inside, the merchant crews were still drinking, still arguing, still living their complicated lives. In the corner booth, the scorched-wing veterans had resumed their stories, their deep voices carrying over the crowd. Looked up as she entered. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is perfect," Molly said. She grabbed a tray and got back to work. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Word spread through the dragon community about the daughter of the human woman who had saved 300 eggs during the contact wars. Dragons she had never met began stopping by the Ember's Rest just to see her, to thank her for her mother's courage, to offer their protection and their respect. It was strange and overwhelming and sometimes frightening. Molly had spent her whole life trying to stay invisible, trying to avoid the attention that could get a human killed in dragon space. Now she was famous, or at least as famous as a waitress could be. Dragons bought her drinks and told her stories about the wars and asked her to pass along messages to her mother. She passed along every message. Her mother, in turn, sent back stories of her own. Stories about the war, about the choices she had made, about the fear and the hope and the impossible moments when everything had hung in the balance. For the first time in Molly's life, she truly understood who her mother was and what she had been through. Came back to the Ember's Rest every week. He always sat in the same corner booth, always ordered the same flame mead, always asked Molly to sit with him for a while. They talked about many things, about the wars and the peace that followed, about the future and what it might hold, about humanity and dragons and the strange ways that the universe brought people together. "Your mother changed the course of history," he told her one night. "She does not understand this because she was too close to the events to see them clearly. But I have had 30 years to think about what she did, and I know the truth. If she had not warned us about the attack on the nesting ground, the extremists would have succeeded. 300 eggs would have been destroyed. The Dragon High Command would have blamed humanity and broken off the negotiations. The accords would never have been signed. The war would have continued until one species or the other was extinct. That is a lot of weight to put on one person's shoulders. It is the weight of truth. Your mother saved both our species, Molly. She saved us from ourselves. Molly did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just sat with the old dragon and watched the flames dance in his goblet and thought about all the impossible things that were possible when someone was brave enough to try. 3 months after that first night, Molly received a message that changed her life again. It was from her mother, and it contained just one line. I am coming to visit. She arrived 2 weeks later on a passenger transport from the inner systems. Molly met her at the docking bay, and for a long moment they just stood there, looking at each other across 30 years of secrets and silence. Then her mother opened her arms, and Molly ran into them, and they held each other while the crowd swirled around them, oblivious to the history they represented. I am so sorry, her mother whispered. I am so sorry I never told you. You were protecting me, I understand. I was protecting myself. I was afraid of what you might think of me. Molly pulled back and looked into her mother's eyes. Green eyes, just like her own. Eyes that had seen things no 17-year-old should ever have to see. I think you are the bravest person I have ever known, she said. I think you are a hero. Her mother laughed, a sound that was half sob and half joy. I'm a baker, I make bread. You saved 300 children, you helped end a war, you changed the course of history. And yes, you also make very good bread. The two are not mutually exclusive. They laughed together, tears streaming down their faces, holding onto each other like they might never let go. Later that night, Molly brought her mother to the Ember's Rest, had agreed to close early to give them privacy for the reunion that was about to take place. The only customers remaining were the members of the Scorched Wing Legion, who had traveled from across the sector to be here. Rose as they entered. He was taller than Molly remembered, or maybe he just seemed that way because of what she knew about him now. His single golden eye fixed on the gray-haired woman at her side, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then her mother stepped forward and did something that Molly never would have expected. She bowed. The unbroken, she said. I am, 34 years ago you spared my life when you could have killed me. You listened to my warning when you had every reason to believe it was a trap. You gave me your mark and sent me home to my family. I have thought about you every day since then. I have wondered if you survived the wars. I have hoped that you found peace. The old dragon stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, bringing his head down to her level. He said, his voice thick with emotion, You gave me back my children. You gave me back the future of my people. There is no debt I could ever repay, no honor I could ever offer that would be equal to what you have given me. He reached out and took her hand in his massive clawed one. I am glad you survived. I am glad you found peace. I am glad you raised a daughter who carries your courage and your kindness in her heart. She is the best of me, Molly's mother said. Everything good that I am, she is more. Then let us drink to her. Rose to his feet and gestured toward the bar, where had laid out goblets of flame mead for every dragon and glasses of wine for the humans. Let us drink to both of you, two who walked through fire to save children, and to Molly, who reminds us every day what it means to be brave. They drank together, humans and dragons, in a tavern at the edge of dragon space. They told stories and shared memories and laughed at jokes that crossed the boundaries of species and history. They grieved for those who had been lost and celebrated those who remained. And when the night was over and the last drinks had been finished, Molly walked with her mother back to the quarters she had reserved on the station. They did not speak for a while. They did not need to. Finally, as they reached the door, her mother turned to her. I have something for you, she said. Something I should have given you years ago. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small book, worn and battered and clearly very old. The cover was made of some kind of leather that Molly did not recognize, and the pages were filled with handwritten text in a language she could not read. "This is my journal from the wars," her mother said. "I wrote down everything, every mission, every choice, every fear and hope and prayer. I have kept it hidden for 30 years because I was afraid of what it represented, but now I think it is time for you to have it." Molly took the book carefully, feeling the weight of history in her hands. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. You deserve to know the whole truth, not just the parts that make me look brave, the parts that show my fear, my doubt, my mistakes, the parts that show I was human." "You are human, Mom. That is what makes you special." Her mother smiled, and in that moment she looked young again. Young and brave and full of hope, walking through the fire to save children she had never met. "Good night, Molly. I love you." "I love you too, Mom. Good night." She watched her mother disappear into the guest quarters, then stood alone in the corridor for a while, holding the journal against her chest. Through the observation windows, the stars burned bright and cold, the same stars that her mother had seen 34 years ago, the same stars that would still be burning long after both of them were gone. Somewhere out there, 300 dragons who had once been eggs were now adults. They had children and of their own. They lived and loved and fought and dreamed, all because a teenage human girl had been brave enough to walk through fire. Molly thought about that. She thought about the way one act of courage could ripple outward through time and space, touching lives that would never know its origin. She thought about her mother, young and terrified and determined, walking toward the enemy lines with bullets in her body and hope in her heart. And she thought about herself, standing at the crossroads of the galaxy, holding a piece of history in her hands. She was the daughter of. She was a waitress in a tavern at the edge of dragon space. She was small and ordinary and nothing special. But maybe that was okay. Maybe ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they were brave enough to try. Maybe the universe was made of small acts of courage, piled one on top of another until they became something more than the sum of their parts. She tucked the journal under her arm and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow, she would read her mother's words and learn the full truth of what had happened during the contact wars. Tomorrow, she would understand the weight of the mark and the meaning of the medal and the reason why dragons bowed to a baker from Oregon. But tonight, she would sleep. She would dream of fire and stars and the sound of her mother's voice, telling her that even the smallest person could change the course of history. All they had to do was be brave enough to walk through the flames.